I'm going to call this meeting to order. Time is 18:19 or 6:19 p.m. My name is Commissioner Paris. Commissioner Safan is absent. Actually, I shouldn't be saying this. I should be calling roll instead. Yes, please.
Okay. President Donovan. Commissioner Paris.
Here.
Commissioner Safan is not here. She called in.
Excused absence. With us, we have Director Arntz and, of course, our wonderful Secretary, Don Chan. All right, moving on to item number two.
General public comment. Public comment on any issue within BOPEC's general jurisdiction unless otherwise included in an item on this agenda.
Hello, Brent Turner from California Association of Voting Officials. Just wanted to make note that we are waiting to see the slalom contract, which I think was supposed to be out and is being revised right now. So we're looking forward to seeing that. We've been having some conversations within City Hall, and it seems as though everybody is excited about the open source voting project to make sure that we're moving forward. Of course, timing is of the essence, and getting the proper funding in place for the project. It's been 10 years in the making, and we're looking forward to moving as quickly as possible to a proper system that will not only benefit the city, county, and the state, but also the rest of the country. Thank you.
I'm president of the California State Money Campaign. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that focuses, statewide organization that focuses on problems with money in politics and campaign finance and electoral reform. We have not yet focused much on the issue of open source voting systems, but in the current environment, it has come to our boards and our supporters' attention how crucial this problem is. We're very excited to see San Francisco engaged in this open source voting system process. And when we pulled our members statewide, helping San Francisco finish this project in timely fashion was the absolute top issue of all of our 100,000 supporters statewide. So we were really eager to see what happened. We're eager to see this long report, as you guys see. And there's a couple quick questions. Is I'm just looking at because I'm new to your budget processes, especially if recommendations come through and money, significant additional funds are allocated to work on the process as recommended. Does it come through your budget? Because I'm not seeing anything, at least at first glance, in these charts here that would apply to X $1 or $2 million or whatever the case may be for first chunks, or does it come through some other part? That's kind of a general question I would have about what's that process.
John, would you be willing to answer that question?
Well,
sorry.
So that's the end of my comment. If you're able to answer that question, that would be. But we thank you for your work.
All right. Seeing no other public, let's move on to item number 3. Review. Go ahead.
You want me to call it? Okay. Review of department's proposed budget. Discussion and possible action regarding the proposed fiscal year 2018-2019 of the Department of Elections.
Would you like to go over a general overview, Director?
Yeah, so we provided the forms that we submitted to the mayor's office, which is part of the budget instructions that all departments need to submit a proposed budget to the mayor's office. So you'll see that some of the forms that are in the packet don't apply to the department. This is the part of the budget instructions. We include them. We try to make notes up at the top of each page that apply to the department. Then also the way that it reads is that the 17-18 would be the current budget, and then there's an 18-19 base budget which pulls essentially from the 17-18 budget for the most part, unless there's an increase based on MOU or another department increases a yearly inflationary increase in its cost. Then there's the department's proposed budget, and there's the difference. budget, and then there's the change. So there'd be a forward slot for change, and that would be the difference between the department's proposed budget against the base budget, which is pulling from the current fiscal year. And that just repeats itself for the fiscal year 1920. So that's why you've got all those columns. That's how it's pulling information. And then when the city just went to a new fiscal system, and you noticed that it wasn't pulling the data correctly into the reports, so we had to input the information manually for the most part. So you will see in some of the forms where the numbers for the base 18-19 base budget don't match the 17-18 budget. And then if you look on the form is this? It's not a form number, but it's in my packet. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th page of the forms. At the top, it's budget system report 15.006 into department services. And then if you look at the 17-18 original budget, those numbers, the system pulled in incorrect.
One second, Director, if you don't mind, see if we can get on the same page, so to speak.
Or literally.
There were some numbers, there were some identification in caps on the Excel sheets. I don't know if they.
Yeah, this one's not numbered though.
Well, I've got to read the book here.
Yeah, not recognizing that particular. Or 15.4.006, is that it? Okay. 15.6. I know there's a lot of stuff to print.
780.
15.4.005 I found. I'm close.
So after Form 3A,
I've got Form 3A.
So we had told them the numbers you see.
I see 2A, 2B, 2C.
yeah, it's not a big deal. I don't want to-
So Director, maybe you can cut us.
Can we just take a peek there?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is, we said doesn't really have any impact on it. And it's just that in the one column, it pulled in numbers from the wrong row into the succeeding row. And so the numbers are different, so we had to manually input the information.
Got it.
That's all. And then those numbers repeat themselves in Form 3A too
Okay.
as well, so.
So this is facility costs, it looks like, on this one.
Mhm.
Okay. There's 17.
I have a general question about projecting the budget, since I don't believe I've actually seen a budget projection going out this far yet on this commission. Though of course, I could be wrong. In making these projections, are you referring to previous elections only? Are you making assumptions based on how many trends? Are you adjusting for inflation? How are we coming up with these numbers roughly?
Yeah, it's all of the above. So the 18-19 base budget is pulled straight from the current 17-18 budget. And then, so a lot of MOUs, for instance, have wage increases for personnel. So when the system presents this information to the department, the system's already populated those wage increases, for instance. When it comes to increase in let's say, a lease with space, potentially, if the formula is set correctly, if the lease is to increase 2% on a yearly basis due to inflation, then that would pull over into the base budget as well. So that would be the base budget, but then the department's proposed budget, we're looking at what was pulled over from the current fiscal year into the next succeeding fiscal year. And then we look at previous elections information and try to forecast what we expect to have happen as far as resources, more specifically, that we'll need in the next fiscal year compared to the current fiscal year. So 18-19, for instance, is a one election fiscal year, or 19-20 the two election fiscal year. But the current year, 17-18, is a one election fiscal year. So 19-20, those numbers aren't going to really match too closely with 17-18. And so it's a different comparison than we apply looking at 18-19.
And of course, a special election just won't throw it all up in the air, but.
Well, they're not special elections because it's a scheduled election date. So there's vacancy elections, but they're scheduled. So a special election actually has specific nomenclature around it. Also, there's a different process around special elections.
Do we have special elections in the city?
Occasionally. The last one we had was when Tom Santos passed away. Was that in 09, I think it was. So, but no, we have.
Pretty rare. One other question. I'm looking at the fiscal year 18-19 on page 7 of 12. We're looking at the projected revenues and recoveries by main source. I see the Board of Election, I see the Community College District, the BART Board election, all these other fees that come from there. Why don't I see things that will also be on the ballot, like the Board of Supervisors, the mayor's race, the executive, heads of the executive departments? Is that assumed in a different section that I'm not seeing, or am I reading the chart wrong?
Yeah, you're adding information because that chart is for revenues and recoveries. So BART School District, Community College, we actually reimburse because those elections. So the school district, for instance, when the school board contest on the ballot, the city's actually consolidating the school district election into the city's election. So then the school district reimburses the city. That's why it's the recovery.
Okay, so it's counted as an external entity.
Right.
Even though it's still a government entity. Okay.
The district election.
Thank you.
It's probably in here somewhere. I missed it. What was the total budget for 17-18?
17-18. I didn't get that. It's around the 18-19, which was 17-6 for. So I think it's a little bit less than that. I think it was 16-5 around there for 17-18.
And am I recalling correctly that we did not have any elections in this last fiscal period?
No, so 17-18 is the current fiscal year.
Yes.
So we're having a June election. So the June election.
Okay, so coming up.
Right.
Okay, so it would include that then.
Right.
Okay. When I looked at this, the substantial increase between 18-19 and 19-20, it wasn't clear to me, but I presume this has to do, because I believe it seemed to be, if you look here, it was primarily the biggest difference was in the salaries. This is page 8 of 12 of your budget summary. So it was 18.46 million in the total budget for 18-19, 23.2 million for 19-20, and I see that there's about $2.5 million in difference in salaries, which seems to be the bulk of that.
Yeah, salaries and benefits.
Okay.
So one thing with the salaries, the salary number is not just the per hour wage that someone would earn, but it also includes the fringe benefits.
Okay.
So when you see salaries and benefits, 40% of that number actually would go to fringe benefits.
Okay.
So yeah, and so in the city's employees, most of the classifications have yearly increases in their salaries, which the city applies a formula for fringes. So by default, that number goes up. That's why it's so high.
Okay.
Plus, you have another election.
Yeah, I was going to say, so it's the interim, or whatever, I guess I don't want to call them temporary, but the
Temporary.
seasonal, whatever,
Right.
yeah. Okay, temporary, yeah. So that's the primary reason, because there's 2 elections.
Right.
Okay. And where in this number, I see that you put in about $2 million per, that's the current estimate for the interim voting system. Where does that show in here? Is that under professional specialized services? Again, referring to the total, the split out of the graph on
Yeah, I think it is. 'Cause
8 of 12.
with the new budget system, the categories all changed too. So
Okay.
$2 million.
Rents and leases is 530,100.
Professional
and
services.
530,510.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually had a question about professional services. So the presidential election in 2020 is obviously going to be the big ticket item in every category in fiscal year 2019 to 2020 is obviously bigger, as I would assume. The only one that's not is actually professional and specialized services. And in reading the description of professional and specialized services, I didn't really see what here would decrease. I mean, it's not a substantial decrease. It's about $300,000, but why are we expecting like a decrease in those kind of services?
If you look at Form 3A,
Mm-hmm.
halfway down the page, where you see other professional services, that's where the lease or the rent or rent system applies. So right now, so for 17-18, we're actually paying for potentially, we're budgeted for 2 systems.
Mm-hmm.
Because the current system will conduct the elections for June and November, but then the beginning of 19 is when the next system's costs will hit the budget. So you're seeing 2 systems in the same fiscal year.
Okay,
But then the
that makes
succeeding
sense.
year, you've got 1 system that's being funded. That's where you get the drop.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
My other question.
Additional question, and Commissioner Press is looking. Director Arndt, I am wondering about any funding, and you know, you wrote about that we're currently continue to be under investigation for how we would move forward with a open source system in your memo. But wondering if there is any budgeting in these years, and if not, if it's not here, when would it be added, or where would it be in the city's budget if it were not in the department's budget?
So there's nothing in this budget for developing a voting system. The $2 million for the lease or rent is in this budget, coming from the general fund. I thought that was coming from COID actually, but it's ended up being from the general fund. So my understanding is that the development voting system would come from COID funds. It would not be a general fund expenditure. Now, with that said, as we've seen in the past, like the warehouse, for instance, in previous budgets, even though the warehouse funding for the move to 31 in 2019 is on reserve essentially. We have to go to the board and request the funds to be released. It's not in here, but it showed up in our general fund budget. So potentially going forward, even though COIT would be the funding source for developing a voting system, potentially it could show up in our general fund. But in this funding set of documents, there is nothing for developing a voting system. It's just for the lease or a rent.
Okay. And so can you tell us the process then for making the request to COIT, or what do you anticipate the process would be, just so we can follow it from the point of, you know, the result of this report? Some people are going to review it. Then there will be some funding requests, and obviously we want to continue that funding for this next fiscal year, so there's not a gap. So I think as a body, the commission has certainly been very much in favor of proceeding with that, and would like to. So I'd like to understand what the processes be, so we can best assure that we don't end up with a gap in funding.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the process is. The mayor's office will have to review the business case when it's done, and then the mayor's office will have to call people together and review the business case, and then consider what to fund, if to fund anything. I mean, the mayor's office would be, it is the funding source. Then as far as, I don't know if COIT, I mean, right now, COIT has the development voting system as one of its
major IT projects.
Okay.
But there's nothing that I'm aware of in the current COIT budget that was, that's specific to developing any particular component or item of a voting system. So it's categorized as a major IT project for the city, but I'm not aware of funding being specifically allocated within COIT in this fiscal year for developing a voting system. And I think that depends on the mayor's office and post-business case.
Okay. So I guess then the next question is, when do we expect that report out? Because obviously the clock is ticking.
Yeah. So the RFP that we issued back last year had a due date of January 26th. And Slalom had a draft ready. They did submit a draft by January 26th. I think it was a week or so before then. But people had a lot of comments on that draft business case. So Slalom agreed to extend out to incorporate the comments, the final product. And I met with Slalom yesterday actually, because I reviewed comments that I provided. I didn't get it. I don't think they know yet what their due date is going to be. So I don't want to put a time frame out there because I don't know. I can't tell you.
Okay. And once we get, so in your memo, you did cover sort of the timelines. Do you feel like there's any urgency yet in terms of getting that through this review process to COIT, et cetera? Or do you still think there's time, given the budget cycles?
Yeah, it really it depends, because the mayor will submit a budget to the board around June 1st or so.
Okay.
And then that's when the numbers have got to start matching up. And then the controller's office is actually the entity that receives that budget and then I think populates the system. And then the board would grab information from the system and analyze the budget. And then the board has the month of June essentially to review the budget, go through the hearing process. So like the department, for instance, we usually have one hearing, even though two are scheduled at the end of June. As far as the formulation of the budget is concerned, the department submitted on the 21st of February, but the budget itself is still being developed going into March, going into April, May, into June. I don't want to speak for the mayor's, I don't want to speak for the mayor's office, but that's the time frame. So we submit by the 21st, and at that point, we're more or less done. Then the mayor's office will come back and asking for cuts, and that's where we have that conversation. And then once the budget gets submitted to the board in the end of May, beginning of June, then the board usually comes and they're looking for cuts because folks have different items, different projects, different activities that the board members want to fund, or the mayor's office has, they have a project they're trying to fund, so they'll try to cut from the general fund departments to find additional funding for other projects, other things.
Okay. So and I assume all departments, are all departments due as far as you know on the 21st?
It's different. So we're a general fund. We're what's called the general fund department, which is also enterprise departments. And like the airport, for instance, it's an enterprise department, and they're on a different schedule. I don't know their schedule. It's somewhat in sync with the general fund, but it's a little bit different. The difference between the difference in the categories of the enterprise department and the general fund department are the enterprise departments generate revenue, whereas we will receive recoveries for actions taken, but they actually generate revenue based on their actions.
Okay.
And so they're adding into the budget, where we're kind of seen as taking away from the budget because we don't provide any sort of income.
Okay. So presumably COIT's budget would come out of general fund monies and therefore have to be under the same deadlines.
Yeah, kind of, I guess. COIT is funded through the mayor's office, so COIT does have a budget process. I think last week, Mr. Turner alerted me was their deadline for departments to submit proposed projects for COIT funding. We did because there was nothing to put forward as far as developing a system. But the mayor's office funds it, so I mean, and then Coit also has already stated that one of its, critical or major IT projects going forward is the development of voting system. So I guess there's some interplay there, I don't think it's as tight as what the department's experience, it's a little different setup.
You may not know this because it's not your department, but how much control does the mayor have in terms of flexibility with Coit? So you said it's obviously part of the mayor's department. Does the Board of Supervisors, when they pass a budget, just give the mayor one big gigantic chunk of change and the mayor divides it up however he wants? Or is the Coit funding very specific? The mayor says, I want X number of dollars for Coit. It's going to be that number of dollars. And the reason I'm asking is if ever we have financial issues, can we count on the mayor to beg, borrow, and steal from other places in the mayor's office? Or are we essentially going to be stuck in needing to find a whole other revenue source if finances become a difficulty?
So the board doesn't allocate funds. So what happens is a controller, sets what it expects the city's revenues to be that could fund a city budget, operating budget. And so the controller will get information from Hetch. He'll get information from the assessor's office on property taxes. It'll get information from the airport. It'll get information from whatever revenue source that the city has. Then the controller's office will match or compare those revenue sources, those totals, against expected outflows. And so, for instance, if we know that there's going to be, like that Transbay terminal requires certain X number of $1 million to do whatever, that'll be an expense the controller's office has to take into account when developing what revenues or what funding sources would be available to the mayor's office to develop a budget. And so the board's not involved in setting a budget. It's really the controller's office, and the controller's office isn't so much creating the numbers, it's trying to see what the numbers are, expected inflows and outflows, and any kind of economic trends. And the mayor's office gets the controller's statement on what could be considered funding sources for the general fund departments and for the city's operations in the next 1 or 2 fiscal years. And so then the mayor's office will issue budget instructions saying, all right, here's what we think we can spend for the budget for X, Y years. Here's what we expect for cuts from the departments. Like right now, all the departments are mandated to do a 2% cut on their budgets, on their annual budget. And so the mayor's office goes through that process with the departments. The departments submit their budgets. The mayor's office will look at the submitted budgets. Again, it'll do what the controller did in a way. It'll look at what the inflows and outflows are for the departments as far as responsibilities and mandates are concerned. And then also the mayor's office might have a project that it wants to fund that isn't necessarily part of current responsibility or current goal or whatever of a general fund or enterprise department. So the mayor's office, like creating the office of cannabis, for instance. So the mayor's office had to find the $2-3 million, whatever it was, to establish that office, to fund the personnel, to get equipment and all that. That all came from the general fund, So then the mayor's office does all this, and then it hands over the budget the mayor's office constructed based on the information from the departments, which is founded on the controller's assessment of the city's economic health. And then the board looks at the budgets and determines if there's ways, usually it's ways to cut money from the departments to fund items that the board members or the board itself think require funding that the mayor has insufficiently or not funded in the budget that the mayor has submitted.
Okay, thank you.
That's great. Director Arntz, it does say in here, and you've been very clear about and you can find it here easily. I'm not sure where, for the new voting system, the interim voting system, What I didn't find was the remote accessible vote by mail system and where that is funded and what that amount is. Just wondering if you could point out where that is, how much it is, and what the state of certainty is about the cost of that.
It's to be $100,000 for a 2-year contract, so
Okay.
$50,000.
Okay.
And we're still finalizing the contract with the vendor. It is in there. I can find it. All the categories change. I think.
Right, understand.
A whole new roadmap, but it is in here. I saw it before I came over here. Might be this in that text report. Is that it?
Is this going to be a purchase system or is it a lease system?
No, it's essentially a software license with services.
Okay.
What it's going to be. Yep, I can look for it.
Yeah, I just want to check to make sure we understand what that is and it's adequately funded.
Yeah, that's.
Another question, I saw that there's quite a large, and I don't know if that's exceptional this time, but quite a large reimbursement revenue from SFUSD. Is there a difference in there associated with the change in the qualification of the voters? And is there any other costs associated with that in the budget? Meaning that the voters are qualified to?
Non-citizen voters?
Yeah.
So, you'll see that the district election reimbursement or recoveries that are in that pie, it's 421 for school district, and I think it's 350 for community college. And then the difference is that currently our budget is contemplating a $160,000 reimbursement from the school district to conduct what's called Prop N, the non-citizen voters for school board elections.
Okay.
Now, the city has discussed covering those costs, so it goes back and forth. But currently, in our budget, those costs are contained for recovery. However, the city's also talking about doing an outreach campaign in relation to that set of voters. I don't know if the city intends to cover those costs or to also seek reimbursement from the school district. So that's somewhat of an outstanding question. I mean, the department has done initial cost for the election, so it's not like we're in the dark about what we're going to be doing and the potential cost. But what bucket it's going to be coming from, the city hasn't really made a final decision. So.
Okay, and you're saying that it's 421K
Right.
is the estimate for 18-19. So you said about 167 of that is for the non-citizen voter.
Right, like 160.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, and that part is related to creating a database and managing the data records and the outreach for the voter pamphlet and all those pieces.
Right, the ballots, voter guide, voter ballots, right.
Okay. All right, let's see. Oh, just back to the systems. I understand. I found this, by the way, it's on the back of this sheet here. It's the section on this sheet. It's 196K that was there for the PUC light, heat, and power.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, it's right here.
Yeah, okay.
I also see over here that there's actually 196K here
Yeah.
in a different row for administrative
Yeah,
general.
right.
So you're saying it is
Exactly.
misplaced.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So it's more like this 3,600.
Right,
Got it.
right. If you look at the proposed, the base budget for 18-19,
Yeah.
those are the correct numbers.
I see.
So the 17-18 numbers those were incorrectly inputted by the system. So we manually entered all the other information in there.
Okay. So to compare these, yeah, they're quite far off. Are they gonna give you a new sheet so we can know what the comparison is? Or do you know?
Well, I don't know. So the city's been developing this financial, FSP, financial something. And for the last several years, so this is the first budget cycle they've actually used. I don't think that trying to get these reports so much correct now is a focus. I think they're focused more on making sure that the numbers getting to the end are correct. I don't think this is a reporting function
Yeah.
than it is a inputting function. But yeah, I mean, we
I mean,
could,
the extent to which those are used as some sort of a comparator for the reasonableness of the new numbers, obviously, well, favorable.
yeah, well, I know. But yeah, I mean, we can carve this out from the PDF and input the correct information. Manual.
Okay. I think it'd be useful to know that, just what that comparator is. So request that for the main meeting. And then, was this a cover letter or a letter of conveyance for the BOPEC and for the commission?
Well, it's also the mayor's office.
This is for the mayor's
We use
office.
this as an explanation whenever we get questions about the budget, we use that.
Okay. I guess I would just suggest if you were going to draft another one, it would be useful, I think, to call out the piece that is for the non-citizen voters in that section, because appropriately and very helpfully, it is called out for the interim voting system. That would be my request. I don't have any further questions.
I only just noticed one very tiny item, it's only worth $300, but uniforms? When do we use uniforms?
The warehouse crew would provide insurance with that.
Got it. All right, thank you. That was the last of my questions. Would you be open to fielding a question?
Yeah, thank you. I guess the clarity that I have, if the mayor's office decides to, after doing review, to allocate funds for the development project, resource development project, would that be money that would be added to your budget, or would that go through COIT? Where would that be spent and allocated through?
Yeah, again, I don't know. So, the example I gave was a warehouse that we'll be moving into in 2019. Previously, those monies were showing up in our budget, even with the reserve fund, but now they're not. I'm not seeing them as part of the reserve fund. So, it couldn't. That I can't answer.
And what role will this committee play in either requesting or not requesting, or, funds for that through the mayor's office?
Most likely reviewing, it's mostly what we do. We do not actually have a direct effect of proposing items or creating this. I mean, the director, hats off to him for doing all the heavy lifting. Our main role is oversight, so that's why we shuffle through it, and then we make sure we ask every little question, like, why do you need uniforms, and justifies all of it. And usually Director Arns has a very good excuse for why he has the stuff he does. But that's mainly our point, is just, we just do oversight and nothing with the actual construction.
I guess I would just comment that I anticipate, and we can put on the next agenda for the full commission, the potential for a letter to the mayor's office requesting that adequate funding be made available for the next fiscal year, so we can advocate, but we have no legislative power when it comes to actual budget.
Sure, the public would appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other? All right, let's move on to item number, what are we on?
So no public comment?
Oh, no further public comment on this issue?
Just one quick, Brett Turner from Cabo, just that, you know, we're concerned, I don't know if we've seen the Slalom report, so when Director Arntz mentioned that there's comments that are delaying the report, I'm still looking to see the report and hopeful that some of the open source experts that are hoping to be helpful can make comments as well, because I don't know if that's been posted anywhere, the report in any form so far, where anybody could make a comment that has previously developed this kind of system. That might be helpful. And then regarding the lease, there's a concern there that, and I don't know exactly how much the lease is for, I'm not really familiar with the specifics, but it might be appropriate to make sure, just in case we can have the new system developed. I'm hearing from some people 4 years, other people a year, other people 2 years, but let's just say we could maybe get it done in 2 years. It would be good to be able to not be held to that lease for a full 4-year commitment. I'm assuming that that's the way that lease would be structured, but that's just a point to be made. Thank you.
All right, seeing no further public comment, let's move on to item,
I'm sorry, Commissioner, do you want to entertain a motion to act on the budget?
oh, yes, of course. It's kind of the important part of that whole item. Apologies.
I move that we move to accept, or my motion is that we accept the that we accept the budget from, hold on. I'm having trouble.
I move that we accept the director's budget for the 2018-2019 fiscal year coming up.
Second.
Yeah, I should have done that in the first place. I apologize.
Move it to the full commission for action.
Yes.
Yes, of course. And move it to the full commission for action.
Got it.
Isn't that implied? Yes.
So, on that motion, President Donaldson,
Yes.
Commissioner Ferris,
Yes.
2-0, you have a quorum, motion passes.
Excellent. All right. Moving on to item 4.
Item 4, approval of minutes of previous meetings. Discussion and possible action to approve minutes for the November 1st. I apologize, that's a mistype. It says November 15th on the agenda. It's actually November 1st, 2017, BOPEC meeting.
I've reviewed the minutes and I have no issues or qualms.
Nor do I.
Any public comment on these previous minutes?
Only a point of interest is, was there any motion about the letter to the mayor's office, or was that not necessary?
Let's see.
Is that priority?
Yeah, are you asking, I'm sorry. This is, yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah, we need a full commission on that one, and it needs its
Yeah.
own agenda item for that to have
Yeah.
action. I think without an agenda item, I don't think we can legally move it forward.
right.
Full commission. Action.
Sorry, but any public comment on this agenda item, approval of previous minutes? No? All right, seeing none, let's have a roll call vote.
President Donaldson,
Yes.
Commissioner Ferris,
Yes.
2-0, motion carries.
Excellent. Item number 5?
Item number 5, agenda item for future meeting. Discussion and possible action regarding items for future agendas.
I do not have any currently, unless, of course, we get the report from Solemn. If there is stuff that I feel the BOPEC needs to deal with regarding the budget or any kind of oversight in the nitty-gritty, then I definitely would like that to be on the agenda.
Agreed.
Any public comment on this?
Public comment is if this would be an appropriate place to have an agenda item for writing such a letter with the commission, the full commission's place, that would be
comment or any of that, shall we adjourn this meeting? Time is 19:04.